for the greater good. Okay, T-bowls. That's what we're going to do. Hand-built T-bowls. Now, these are thrown T-bowls, but these are good models for us to consider. This is the style of T-bowl we're going to make here, kind of this idea. And this is not too far off, but we probably won't go for this kind of angled up funnel kind of shape. But this one is very close. I'll show you an example we can pass around. This T-bowl is a great example of what we're going to make, and also some of the organic kind of how we want it to feel in our hand. This is perhaps as large as you ever want to get. This is a pretty big T-bowl. So it's still within acceptable range. There's the foot, but it's getting pretty big. So this would be the maximum size and the maximum thickness. You could feel that as you pass it around. Okay. So we're going to start with what in Native American pottery they call a pokey, just a little dish. And these are bisque dishes that we have here. We have, looks like we have 7 of them, which is great. And so you can use these, and I've asked Jason to make about 30 more of them. So we have them on hand. They say Salon Community College. And they are ideal for this particular maneuver. Now, if you don't have one of these around, one of these little pokies, what you can do is make one. You could just make a little dish shape out of clay and let it dry. Once it's hard leather hard, you can use it. If you're careful, you won't break it. That's fine. You can just use it. If you make one and you like it, you can bring it in a biscuit, and then you can always have it. But even as a hard leather hard piece, or even bone dry, you can still use it. You just have to be careful not to break it. Once it's bisqued, it's very hard to break. I think I don't need that much. We'll take this out aside. So right now I'm starting with a ball, and this is for the bottom. And the bottom of your piece needs to be thick, much thicker than it's going to eventually be. We make a thick bottom on the piece because after it's leather hard, we're going to trim it. We're actually going to trim it like we would any other T-bowl, thrown T-bowl or otherwise. We want to, because the look of clay that is subtracted is different than clay that is added, that is coiled on or slabbed on. The look of clay is quite different. So we do want to set up a situation where we can trim it. So we want a thick foot that will take away from. So in here, inside this is the thickness of the bottom of this bowl right here, and it's also the thickness for this foot is right in here. So you're thinking about that. So you're going to add much more clay than you need. And when I'm doing this, I know I probably don't have to tell you how to make a patty cake, but there is something I'm doing, which is when I turn my hand, it's 90 degrees. It's 90 degrees. So what's happening is that disc of clay is turning around and around. And so it's getting larger, and it's also staying pretty even. That's looking pretty good, a little more. Don't want it to be too thick, too thin, yeah, either one. So then we just push that in. We want to get that nice curve, both inside and out. I can kind of push this out a little bit. Let's see. So what we have now, I'm going to just score this. This is where the sides of the bowl are going on. And this is one method. You could now, from here, I could take this and just coil build the sides, right? Just do a coil built bowl. And I could coil it pretty thin, just the thinness I want for the T-bowl. And then once that's done, I could, once I've coil built it, then I could let it set up, and then I could trim the foot and I'd be done. I actually know an artist in Japan who makes these little dish-shaped
bottoms like this. And then he just throws walls on the wheel and cuts them off and sets them on sets one after another. And so he makes the T-bowls that way. Why? Because it adds a certain kind of movement and asymmetry that he really likes. So it's just, he makes T-bowls in 1,000 different ways, but that's one way that he makes them. Very creative guy on the wheel. So there's our bottom. Now we need to make the wall of the T-bowl. And so for that, if we look at the size of this and we take, where's that bowl that we passed around? Is it over here? So we can kind of use this as a guide. We don't want it, that's about right. We don't really want it any taller than that. It starts to get too deep for this style of T-bowl. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to stretch this out. And remember, when you're throwing a slab, what you want to do is throw it so it hits in the middle. We've talked about that, right? So you want to always hit it right in the middle when you're throwing it. And that will make it stretch out just right. So how much do I need is the question. I don't want it to be too thick, so I have a clear idea about that. But then how long do I need a piece? What I do is I take a coil and I wrap it around. I need a little more clay. I'm going to wrap this coil around here. And so I get a measurement of exactly how big I need my coil to be. And it's just about what I have here. But what I have here is still too thick. So I can just subtract some of this extra clay here. Get rid of some of that. That's really way too thick. So we're just going to keep stretching it. Getting nicer. I've got excess here, so I'm just going to take off some of that. Don't need it. Don't need to be throwing it around. Just make my life as easy as I can. This edge is looking beautiful. I might try to use that. We'll see for the top of the bowl. And now just a little thinner. I don't want it. I'm going to stretch it out a little bit once I put it on the bowl. Once I build it, I'm going to kind of try to move it around a little bit. So I don't want it too thin. Let's get in there, maybe one or two more times. That's pretty good. So now I take my measurement, cut it a little bit bigger than I need it. And take that. And then I'm going to score this. And so I've scored that. I'm going to put some slip on it. Now the other place I have to score is where it's going to attach to the bowl. So that's going to be here. So I'm just going to score that a little bit. And remember to get a scoring tool, at least a fork. You don't want to waste your time with a needle tool. You want at least a fork to score 4 times faster. But these onion slicers tools here are fantastic. You can use a hair pick, but the points on them are not usually as useful as these onion slicers. So now I'm going to take remember, this is just a cardboard tube. That's all it is, a cardboard tube with a little piece of newspaper slid over so that when I put it on, then I can get it easily out and the newspaper will stay in, but the tube will come out. So that's a nice thing. And we have all kinds of tubes right here. And the size tube I took, I took this bowl and said, okay, I want it a little smaller than this, and I'm going to stretch it out. So it has to be no bigger than that, right? And so this is going to produce something about that size even before I start stretching it. So what I'm going to do now is take this
and roll it over and look, well, okay, that's actually longer than I need. So I'm just gonna tear that off. And then I'm gonna score it again. And flip this up, and then this is kind of a neat trick here. I can just score it. Now that I have it lifted up, it's really available for me to score the underside. And I just can take it. You'll see here, I'm rolling it over to the part I've already scored, and then I can just use the tube to compress that and compress that down into it. Now, I could leave that line as a kind of feature on the T-bowl, or I could choose to smooth it in, which is what I'm going to do for this one. Just kind of smooth that out. And then we take our prepared little mold, our little pokey, and we set this in place, just about where we want it. And then I can get a little bit quiet, just sit down, and actually, this might work nicely. I don't know, let's see. Here. And oh, the camera work on this thing is fabulous. Okay, so I'm just going to go around and I'm just going to make sure I get a good join, right? If we're going to use this for a T-bowl, there's going to be liquid in here. We pretty much want it to work, and we don't want to lose our tea at the bottom. So we'll just go around and make sure we have a nice join all the way around. So I'm just pushing into the side of this big fat foot that I've made, and I'm just making sure it just gets right pushed up into that slab there, right? So now you're looking at this thing and going, but Mark, that is just a really awkward looking. It's cylindrical. It doesn't have any life to it, which is fairly accurate. And that's, you know, that's not a great looking T-bowl at this point. But if you watch anybody throw these on the wheel, it's exactly the same. It starts out super symmetrical and kind of somewhat stiff, and then something happens and things come alive. So that's what you're going to do with this. So what I'm doing now is I'm just taking my needle tool and I'm just cutting out excess from the foot. Okay, so now we're getting some nice movement there. We got some nice things happening, and I'm going to go back around now and just work this excess clay all the way around right into the wall. So it looks like it's always been, that wall has always sprung right off the bottom. No change. Now, before I take that cylinder and I'm going to look at it, and if we compare this to our original T-bowl that we've been using as a model, either one of them, we can see we've got a little extra, more than a little. So what I can do now is, now that I'm seeing it, I can now move my needle tool a little. I'm going to undulate it a little bit as I go around. And I'm just going to make a cutting. I'm just going to cut it a little bit, and I'll have that's some good proportion there. I like the way that's looking. It's a little tall, but you'll see I'm going to work with that too. So now I take get my cylinder out of here. Here it comes. Okay. Yeah, it got a little bit pushed into the base. So So now what I'm going to do is, let's get probably my finger, I'm going to just come around and work, just smooth that corner out a little bit. And there's a spot in the very bottom, the center of the bottom, which is called a chamari. It's a little ocean for tea. You want a little dimple at the very bottom for that. And then you want this to have that rounded quality from the pokey because you want it to, you want the inside to have a slight gentle curve up to the walls because that's the shape of the chasen, the bamboo tool that's used to mix the tea powder. So I'm just going around and just giving it a little bit of a curve upward. And this is really where the whole thing starts to develop here because I'm making now, I'm making decisions about the bowl itself and its shape and what it's supposed to look like. So I'm going to reach in with, and I just go slow and gentle and I kind of say, well, maybe I'll let it bulge out a little bit here. I want to just get, and I have to, I'm sculpting, I'm really feeling my way through creating a fullness over here. I'm just going to put a little fullness and then I'll counterpoint that by pushing it in a little bit here. So a little fullness down at the bottom. And you see, as I do this, it's going to shrink a little, it's going to go down a little bit. So I said earlier, don't worry about it being a little taller because it's going to, and then I'm going to think about, well, when I hold it here, I'm going to put a little hand dimple there with my thumb so that it naturally will fit with my hand. And then I'm just going to shape it and, you know, make some interesting form by just gently rubbing the inside and billowing out the clay here and there. And I have to, I can stop and kind of give it a spin and look at it. You can see it's starting to get a lot of character. It's starting to get a lot of movement. And whereas before, remember when I got it off the cylinder, it was like, oh, very stiff. But now it's starting to have some flow to it and some movement. And this kind of idea in tea aesthetics is the idea that it's mimicking forms in nature. Maybe it's mimicking a tree trunk. And so that's looking pretty good. And then what I will finish with is I'm just going to kind of come to the lip here. And the lip it's got a little too much action going on. It's got a sharp edge from my tear there. And rather, I might soften that now. And probably I'll see what I can do. I'm just, you know, I'm doing that thing where rather than one bold move, I'm doing like 1,000 little tiny pressures. And that's going to make a much better shaping. I want this to thicken up a little bit. Is this making some sense? You see how it's, and then I'm following this line like I love. This has a really sweet, that, you know, undulating line from my original cut with my needle tool. And when I'm done with this kind of shaping, the last thing I will do is I will cut the foot. And I can probably get that done at the very end. If I put it out in the sun now, we might be able to see that happen today. So we'll get that part of it too. And the aesthetics of tea, they really want everything, everything is kind of mimicking in some way or another. It's mimicking nature and natural forces, natural elements, natural ideas. So the idea of a tree trunk, or the idea in the case of this lip of sort of an undulating landscape of rolling hills. The body of this thing does feel a little bit like maybe a tree trunk. which we get to see lots of with all our wood splitting. Okay, so that, I'm really liking the way that's looking. You notice there's not a lot of extreme action here. It's pretty subtle, the undulations. And when I'm doing a push out, it's not like I'm not pushing like making a little bulb or a ball. I'm making kind of a flowing, bulging, kind of moving, kind of, maybe more like waves than bumps, something like that. So that's all it needs until I do the cutting of the foot. Any questions, comments, thoughts? Personal information no one knows that you'd like to share with YouTube?
Is there a front and a back to that, or is that all just kind of?
Is there a
however
what?
You decide you like.
Oh, a
to
front
take-
or a back?
Yeah.
That's a good question. When you're serving tea, there's the tea person determines which part of the bowl is the front. And when they serve you, they put that towards you. And part of the tea ceremony is when you pick up the bowl, you turn it a few times to say, I'm not going to keep the most beautiful part for myself. I'm sharing that with everybody. So you turn it outward. And the answer to that is really kind of interesting in that many bowls will have 2 or 3 or 4 different fronts, depending on the season and what the tea person is trying to express, how they're feeling. But I often, especially with wood-fired bowls that are so varied all the way around, they can have many different fronts. There isn't a front. The front is wherever the tea person says it is. So that can change. All right, good question. Any other questions?
You said you're gonna carve the foot in?
Right, I'll carve the foot to make it look kind of like that. That'll be where we'll head. But right now, there's like this much clay down there, right? So.
Is there any particular shape with the part that you will put on your lips that you want? I mean, you don't want it really sharp and jagged or anything, but
No.
do you work on that? as a-
After, so I do make it soft here, but sometimes with the firing and the way the ash falls on it, sometimes there can be sharp or jagged, and then you just sand it. But also, sometimes when you get a really dry ash, it's kind of interesting. You get a nice, soft, kind of almost frosted ash surface. You can sand some of that. You don't want it to like arrest, like if a cloth for cleaning is going over it or wiping, you don't want to snag that. So you will sand it with maybe a 600 grit sandpaper. But I don't take it all off, because when you get that really soft, sugary surface, sometimes it'll just, when you're drinking, it'll just pull on your lip a little bit. It feels, and the poetic idea is you're getting kissed by the bowl. So, you know, you got all kinds of options there. Okay, so there's that. And